Welcome to the Triage Method podcast with me, Gary McGowan, and my co-host, as always, Mr. Patrick Farrell. Paddy, how are you?
I am positively splendid, Gary. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Lovely. And what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about drugs. So we've been talking about supplementation, and we spoke a bit last week about supplementation for fat loss. And we discussed many different supplements, and we alluded to a couple of supplements that might slot into the medications category. So we said we'd follow up with a full episode on, those supplements or medications that you're probably not going to be getting over the counter, probably not getting them on your usual supplement website, and would ideally be prescribed by a doctor. So some of these are on-label licensed weight loss medications that we'll be discussing, and others are medications or drugs that might be used by bodybuilders, for example. So this will give you, I think, a useful insight, regardless of whether or not you're ever considering these medications, of how weight loss works and how weight loss supplementation works. And this is important because it's something we've actually touched on in multiple episodes so far. We've said that even when it comes to these, powerful drugs, powerful medications, you're still never escaping the fact that it comes down to energy balance. And the basic calories in, calories out equation can still explain the mechanism of all of these medications. And that's something I really want to impress upon you in this episode.
Yeah, and we did actually do a similar episode when we were going through the obesity series. We did go through some of the medications that are often prescribed for obesity. So there is a lot of overlap in this episode because obviously obesity is treating obesity is just more extreme fat loss. There's just either more fat to lose or there is a faster impetus to lose that fat, or not a faster impetus, an increased impetus to lose that fat, right? So we have covered a lot of this stuff before, but we do want to go through it again in terms of this overall like supplementation, medication series, whatever you want to call it, that we are doing. But similar to what Gary said, I do want to also reiterate that it still comes down to those baseline health habits, like all the stuff that we talk about all the time. You see a very common thread. Nutrition, your baseline nutrition has to be dialed in. Like you can take all the fucking weight loss drugs in the world. If you don't have good nutrition patterns or whatever, like you're not going to see the results that you want. Now, this is one of the issues, especially with more extreme cases like obesity and stuff, where you might not be able to dial in your baseline health habits unless you are on drugs. It's like a chicken or egg thing, right? Some people just find it incredibly difficult to, control their hunger, for example, incredibly difficult to stay on track with certain diets. And taking medications may be the missing piece for them to even be able to do those baseline health habits, healthy diet, etc. However, again, it is one of those chicken or egg things where some of the things they're going to need help with in terms of medication. Some of the things it's still going to be just the same stuff that everyone deals with, like exercising. You have to find time to do it. You have to actually do it. You actually have to push yourself. Like there's no real medication that's going to do that for you, right? So there is, like, you have to tackle this stuff from all angles. It's not just an either or, which oftentimes I feel like in the fat loss space, especially when we're talking about obesity, like it's very moralized. It's very dichotomized as well, where it's like, oh, if you take drugs to help with your fat loss, you're a bad person. This is just a stupid thought process overall. But then also it's made into this dichotomy of like it's either drugs or it's willpower and just do it yourself, when those two things should easily just be married together. Like they don't need to be separated. But anyway, Gary, before we get off on a tangent with that, what are the drugs? What are the weight loss, fat loss medications that are often used? Well, I wouldn't say often used, but are often thought about in this discussion.
Yeah, so the first category is certainly one that's used a lot, and that's the category of stimulants. And we've discussed stimulants already because these definitely cross that bridge between supplements and medications. Naturally, those that will fit into the medication or drug category are going to be more powerful. And one of those that comes up very frequently in physique slash bodybuilding circles would be clenbuterol. So clenbuterol is a beta-2 adrenergic agonist. And what that means is that it basically agonizes or increases signaling related to the beta-2 adrenergic receptors. Okay, so this is part of your sympathetic nervous system, sort of. So it's related to the sympathetic nervous system or sympathetic activation. And this is the branch of the nervous system that basically turns you into a fight or flight mode. So you're hyped up, you're energetic, everything's moving really quickly. You're in that go phase, okay? And that's fundamentally what you're doing when you take something like clenbuterol. You're basically putting yourself in that go phase, but you're doing it over a longer period of time. So when you see someone that takes clenbuterol, they might be jittery, they'll be sweaty more, they might be anxious, their heart rate's going to be increased. So you're basically taking your resting metabolism and ramping everything up, okay? Obviously, that's something that would increase your resting energy expenditure. If you're ramping up every system or lots of different systems to work at a higher rate, then you're going to increase your resting energy expenditure. And you see increases of resting energy expenditure of around 20% or sometimes even more. So the question of how much it increases your energy expenditure might then be modified by, for example, how active you are. So if you get plus 20% of your resting energy expenditure, but because of the clenbuterol, you're now also burning more during exercise, there might even be a greater increase in your energy expenditure. So you can appreciate that would be quite potent. Like, for example, if your maintenance calories were normally 2,000 calories and you increase that by 10, 20%, you're talking 200 to 400 extra calories to maintain. And therefore, if you're eating the same calories, you're going to lose far more weight as a result. There's also potentially some impact on appetite regulation from the use of clenbuterol. That doesn't seem to be a very consistent effect. The most pronounced thing that we see is that increase in resting energy expenditure. And another reason that bodybuilders in particular will use this drug is that it doesn't just act on fat loss itself, because beta-2 adrenergic receptors are dispersed throughout the body, and including skeletal muscle. And one of the things that we see is that this also may have an impact on muscle hypertrophy, potentially performance as well. So there's effects that go beyond just the fat loss. And it's probably the case that when someone takes clenbuterol, you'd experience both fat loss and potentially muscle gain or better muscle retention. Now, of course, it's very difficult to tease that out when this is used in bodybuilding practice, let's say, because it's going to be used in conjunction with things like testosterone and potentially other anabolic drugs. So you're rarely going to be encountering a bodybuilder that's just taking clenbuterol, because if you're using that, then you're probably already on tests and multiple other drugs. But overall, you can think of clenbuterol as ramping up the system, stimulating your basal metabolism, potentially modifying your appetite, and leading to a situation where you're likely to have less body fat and potentially more muscle as a result.
Yeah, and I don't think there's much else to say on it. Like, it's an effective drug. That's why bodybuilders use it. Obviously, there's a lot of side effects that go along with it. Like, we're definitely not suggesting, oh, someone wants to lose a bit of weight or some fat. Clenbuterol, first step, like, it just doesn't make sense. The only reason we're covering these drugs is because, well, first of all, someone asked us to do it. But second of all, because it gives you a better picture of what's at play. When you see people on social media, you see different things going on, you're like, okay, so there are actually drugs that help with achieving this goal. It's not all just willpower and, oh, I can stick to my diet easier, so clenbuterol helps with fat loss, helps with the actual fat loss itself, but then it also potentially modifies some of the things that we would classically modify with regard to fat loss, in terms of it maybe makes you able to burn more energy. You're able to just do more throughout the day, either by virtue of being a little bit more jittery. Maybe your NEAT goes up a little bit. You're taking a few extra steps. You're doing a bit more extra movement, fidgeting a bit more, etc. you're able to maybe push yourself in the gym a little bit harder. Now, some people would argue that you aren't able to push yourself in the gym as much. You might get some cramps, for example, and like different areas, calves, low back, whatever. So you aren't able to push as hard. You also might notice that your heart rate gets too high during, say, cardio, which might give you, and well, first of all, might give you some sort of anxiety-like feeling where you're like, fuck, I need to stop this. And as a result, you don't burn as many calories. But also it does, for a lot of people, have appetite effects, we'll say. A lot of people find that their appetite is somewhat blunted when taking stuff like clenbuterol or stimulants in general. People find that their anxiety goes up a little bit, and a lot of people find that when their anxiety is a little bit higher, they aren't as hungry. They don't eat as much. So we've got the two classical things that we often modify, which is increasing our energy output. So we've got a lot of stuff going on there when you take clenbuterol, but also potentially also modifying our energy input, making it easier to eat fewer calories while still burning a lot of energy by virtue of exercising more. Your resting metabolic rate goes up, etc. So
let me just say one more thing on just before we move on, just about that. Like, that can seem tempting. Like, if you're a healthy person and you look at that, you think, oh, well, that sounds great. I'll deal with a bit of jitteriness and a bit of sweating, etc. That sounds fine. But the problem is, if you think of something like a beta-2 agonist, right? That's like, basically, when you hear someone taking a beta blocker for example, reducing their blood pressure or their heart rate, or heart disease risk, the reason when people take that medication, that's basically the total opposite of something like clenbuterol. So when you're taking clenbuterol, you're putting yourself at risk of having a faster heart rate, potentially encountering cardiac arrhythmias where you have dangerous heart rhythms. You have putting yourself at increasing your blood pressure, etc. So you can't just turn everything up and expect no side effects to occur. Okay, there's a natural balance in the body between the sort of sympathetic nervous system actions and the parasympathetic nervous system actions, where we have periods where we're ramping everything up, but we need those periods of rest. We need our body to come back to normal. And if you're constantly ramping up the system, even though it's not serving any particular purpose, there is likely to be risks occurring from that. So the reason I say that is because you might be wondering, why a doctor would prescribe this for fat loss, but they might prescribe some of the other drugs that we'll talk about later on. And this largely comes down to considering the side effect profile, and especially long-term risk as well.
Yeah, and there are actually quite a lot of side effects with clenbuterol. Like, it is cardiotoxic, and your cardiomyocytes, when they're affected by this, it's not like they just regrow. It's not like, oh, I just take it, I got some damage to my heart, it's all good. No, you've got that damage for life now. It's like these are cells that aren't regenerating, we'll say, right? Or they're not regenerating the same way other cells would, at least, right? So you could take one tablet of clenbuterol and have necrosis of the heart. That's just not beneficial for long life. It's realistically probably not going to be that bad, but it is cardiotoxic. So ideally you would not consume clenbuterol. That would be a better option. But it is in the arsenal there. It is something that people use for eliciting fat loss, weight loss, etc. Now, there are other stimulants, and I just put these in here. We're not going to go into them too in depth, but they are often, again, in this overall fat loss, weight loss medication category. And that's stuff like Adderall, modafinil, and various other what are often called smart drugs. And we've talked about a few of these before, and we actually will talk about them in other episodes in this series. But they are, for a lot of people, very stimulating. Some people, they actually get the opposite effect, but for a lot of people, they are quite stimulating drugs. They do cause you to move around a little bit more. So again, we're, energy expenditure. They generally, especially stuff like Adderall, people generally find that their appetite is blunted quite a bit. And again, that's modifying that energy in stuff, or at least allowing you to stick to your diet a lot easier. Like, a lot of people will say, oh, I took some modafinil, for example, and I just wasn't hungry. I just forgot about eating until the end of the day, which is obviously phenomenal for staying on track with your weight loss diet. If you just don't think about eating, you just forget it. Now, modafinil actually does have some interesting effects in orexin and other hunger hormones. But again, we're not going to get into them today because generally speaking, Adderall, modafinil, any of those kind of things, Ritalin, whatever, like they're not generally prescribed as fat loss or weight loss medications. So the only reason I'm bringing them up is they fall into this stimulant category, and they do have effects in terms of weight loss or fat loss, but they're generally, we'll call them like adjacent to the medications that are often recommended. However, it is important to understand that they do have effects. They do have effects in terms of fat loss, weight loss. So they do play into this overall drug pharmacopoeia or whatever that we have available to us, right? And now again, you have to get it prescribed, so maybe it's not available to you, but you know what I'm saying. So do you have anything to say on Adderall, modafinil, Ritalin, anything like that?
No, I don't think so. I think, you've covered it well.
Yeah. And there are obviously other stimulants that we talked about. Either they're just over the counter stuff, caffeine, for example. And there are also stuff that we could potentially call stimulating, like thyroid medication, for example, like that. Potentially you could say that's a stimulant. We will talk about that in a moment. But
also illicit drugs as well, cocaine, MDMA. I mean, you've probably seen people who have potentially gone down the wrong path there with some of those drugs, and they're probably not the bulkiest people. That very often you see those side effects manifest.
Like meth, for example, which is
there you go.
Just like Adderall. Well, not really, but it is very similar. Like, again, there's a reason that they're all very skinny, right? But anyway, yeah, drugs, illicit drugs, cocaine, the likes, they obviously do have effects here, right? But anyway, we'll move on from that stimulant category. We'll move on to, let's call it metabolic drugs. One of these we did actually cover in, I think it was the last episode, which is DNP. So Gary, do you have anything to say on DNP?
Yeah, I'll just summarize what I said in the last episode for those who maybe haven't listened to it. So, like DNP or dinitrophenol, this basically acts on the electron transport chain, which is the last part of our kind of normal basic metabolic pathways that you'll be looking at if you were to study metabolism. And basically what it does is it decouples the energy substrate metabolism. So if we take an energy substrate like carbohydrate, we're breaking that down to try to get the energy out of it. It basically decouples the amount of ATP or energy currency that you should get from that molecule of carbohydrate. It decouples what you should get from what you actually do get. So it basically enters into the system a degree of inefficiency. So instead of getting more ATP produced, it increases the amount of heat that's produced. So we get more heat that's produced through this uncoupling effect instead of getting ATP. So that obviously leads to, the conservation of energy because it's still converting it to heat energy, but we just end up with less ATP as a result. And this leads to increase in our overall metabolic rate as a result of taking something like DNP. Now, the problem with that is that if you're rapidly increasing thermogenesis, the production of heat in the body, you can pretty much quite literally just burn yourself alive. You can set your metabolism crazy, end up hyperthermic, and you can die. Okay, so it's not a safe drug.
You don't have a cure for that. Like maybe you put you in an ice bath, but it's
yeah,
you're cooking yourself from the inside out.
From the inside out. Yeah. So this isn't a drug that I would necessarily recommend. There are people that take it. I know people that take it. I think it's actually making a little bit of a resurgence in bodybuilding these last few years, because people have realized that the risk profile is really, of course, as with most drugs, dose dependent, and some people are playing around with smaller doses and things like that. But overall, it's just not a drug I'm recommending. Increasing inefficiency into your cellular metabolism by basically, you're kind of just poisoning your mitochondria in some way. It's just probably not the greatest idea, especially when it's not very well studied. There are some other metabolic drugs that you could say in some way also might poison your mitochondria, but it's a far more controlled effect. I wouldn't be reaching for the DNP too quick.
Yeah, especially because I'm pretty sure there's no pharmacy that makes DMP. So it's all going to be
Yes, it's not where you get
all some lad you cooking it up in his bathtub, right? So
it.
you might be like, oh yeah, I'm only taking a small amount. These capsules or tabs or whatever, they say they're X. I'm not going to give any dosing here. They say they're X amount in it, but you don't know that. That's some guy in his fucking bathtub that made that. He could be like, yeah, just pour that in there. So like again, wouldn't be me. Wouldn't be something that I'd be like, yeah, this is first line intervention. But as we said, we're going through all of these. These are the things that are at play. These are the things that are people are using. There's a lot of people that do use DMP. A lot of bodybuilders use it in the couple of weeks coming up to competition to really get a certain look. But would it be my first line intervention if I'm just trying to lose a couple of kilos for my holiday? No, absolutely, absolutely not. I probably also wouldn't be using it just to get some plastic trophy. Just wouldn't be me. But I can understand why some people would be willing to do that.
Yeah.
Now, Gary, other metabolic drugs. What other ones do we have at play?
Yeah, you can put metformin in here. Metformin is a very popular drug in medicine, because it's really useful. It's absolutely a great medication, for things like, for example, diabetes, gestational diabetes, PCOS. It has many different uses, and one of those is weight loss. Now, it's not a primary weight loss drug as such. It's more so prescribed for those other indications, but it can contribute to weight loss. And its effects on weight loss aren't necessarily that it's just improving insulin sensitivity, for example, or, reducing hepatic glucose output, which are all mechanisms. It seems like over the last few years that there's more research into some of the central effects of metformin so that it can interact with different areas in the brain to regulate appetite, which is kind of a general theme throughout all of these drugs. Like they have a lot of the weight loss drugs, they have some sort of peripheral mechanism that's interesting. It's like, oh, is it this metabolic effect? Is it this metabolic effect? But then when you really dig into the mechanism of action, it often seems that it's a sort of a neurocentric, a brain-centric effect where there's a regulation of appetite or energy expenditure that's occurring centrally. And that seems to be the case in the case of metformin. So it can contribute to weight loss. And that's one of those almost like side effects, you could say, that is desirable in the case of it being prescribed for diabetes, for example. So yeah, metformin. There's not too much else to say about it really, because a broader discussion of metformin would fit more into, I suppose, metabolic health and diabetes. But for weight loss, it does seem to have some positive effects as well.
Yeah, I don't really have much else to add. Again, it wouldn't be something that I'd be like, oh, it's fat loss time. Let's get the metformin out. But if it allows you to stick to your calories a little bit better and you maybe get some slightly better nutrient partitioning as a result, like obviously, again, you can see why people would potentially use that. A lot of people also use it while trying to gain weight, which you might think is a little bit strange. But again, it's just for that, we'll say, better nutrient partitioning effect. Now, whether that's something that I would personally, put my hat on, probably not. Probably not that great. It also does seem to have some potential negative effects in terms of exercise performance, potentially also muscle gain itself. And now I know it doesn't interact as much with the mTOR system as, say, something like berberine, for example. But again, it is working through, we'll call it the AMPK system, which is kind of antagonistic to mTOR, which is stimulating muscle gain. So it wouldn't be something that I would personally recommend. But again, I can understand why people would. Now, there are also some other, we'll call them medications, drugs. They are just hormones within the body, which do play a role in fat loss, and also like muscle gain, also muscle retention. So there are a variety of hormones that you could classify as weight loss drugs, fat loss drugs, because they play a role. There's mechanistic reasons why they would help with this stuff. And for some people, taking these drugs leads to the outcome of weight loss or fat loss. So Gary, do you have anything to say on the hormones that people often put in this category?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few different hormones that fit into this category, and you'll see, bodybuilders playing around with a lot of these. So one of those would be testosterone. Okay, so generally, if you're increasing your testosterone level, you are going to have better body composition. So you get different nutrient partitioning effects. So for example, if we were going to have a fixed caloric surplus, more of it would be lean mass rather than being fat mass. So it promotes a generally more anabolic state. And in the case that you were going to lose weight, you'd be likely to lose more body fat as opposed to muscle itself. Now, whether or not it would contribute, directly to an increase in energy expenditure or appetite regulation kind of depends on the context. Because if you were in a case where you had testosterone deficiency and you had gained weight as a result, maybe you were very lethargic, you had low energy levels, you were depressed, etc., and then you corrected that and suddenly you had more energy, you had more vitality, you felt like being more active, you were more aggressive, you were ready for the gym, etc. All these things could potentially improve weight loss as a result. So when it comes to testosterone, correcting testosterone deficiency is likely to be useful and would be a solid indication for something like taking testosterone. But generally, people aren't just taking anabolic steroids for the purpose of just fat loss. They're generally trying to get the pro muscle building or muscle retention effect. So that's testosterone really. Thyroid is obviously another example. Thyroid hormones are among the most commonly used agents for supporting fat loss in bodybuilders that are in competition prep. So thyroid is kind of very similar to the discussion related to clenbuterol. Thyroid basically regulates your whole metabolism. There's thyroid receptors throughout the body. And when you ramp up thyroid hormone production, what you end up with is a state very similar to that described when we discussed clenbuterol. You get an increase in your heart rate, you're going to be sweatier, you're going to be jittery, you're going to be anxious, you're going to have an increase in your blood pressure, you have all this energy. That's effectively what occurs when you have a high level of thyroid hormone. So again, does it support weight loss? Does it increase your energy expenditure? Yes, absolutely. Do we run into all the same side effects that I discussed in relation to ramping up the sympathetic nervous system? Yeah, very similar, and that's something that's actually seen fairly commonly in terms of high thyroid hormone levels in hyperthyroid diseases, causing things like atrial fibrillation and other arrhythmias. So again, not something to just be played around with when you don't know what you're doing, but if you're correcting a hypothyroid state, likely to be of benefit. So that would be thyroid. And then the final one is growth hormone. And growth hormone, you might be thinking, wait, what? Growth hormone we're talking about this in the context of weight loss, isn't it a growth drug? But growth hormone is actually a bit of a kind of a weird hormone. It has a lot of like counterintuitive effects. It often relies on things like pulsatility, and if you have too much growth hormone, it has different effects. It's a weird hormone, but there are proposed mechanisms as to how it might contribute to fat loss. It doesn't really seem to do all that much in trials that have been studied. Now, bodybuilders do continue to use growth hormone for the purpose of body recomposition or weight loss and other related effects. But I don't think it really moves the needle all that much on weight loss itself. If you have growth hormone deficiency, again, when you're correcting to a physiological state, there might be benefits there. But just adding on more growth hormone, does it have significant effects on weight loss? I'm not all that sure. I haven't seen that much convincing research on that, to be honest.
Yeah, and you might think that there are potential benefits for certain dosing protocols, like taking it around morning exercise when you're fasted, different things like that, which again, it might have an effect in terms of increasing lipolysis. And then obviously if you're burning that, maybe you're able to get a slightly leaner look that you wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. Like you're able to mobilize fat in certain areas and then actually use it. But is it one of those drugs that you start taking it and all of a sudden the fat just starts melting off? You lose those 20 extra kilos that you've been carrying around? Probably not. Again, if you're correcting a deficiency, yeah, obviously there's going to be more of an effect there. But in terms of the general use of it, probably not that great of an effect. There might be some potential benefits in terms of muscle gain and muscle retention, especially if you're using it in or alongside something like testosterone, there potentially are synergistic effects there. But at a baseline, if you're like, oh, I think I'm going to start taking drugs for fat loss or weight loss or whatever, would I be like, yeah, whip out the growth hormone? No, probably not. Probably wouldn't be the first line intervention for me. Again, I can understand why some people do use it, but it's probably not all that effective, at least in my opinion. So that's the hormones. There are other hormones that we could potentially talk about, especially different neuro hormones or neuropeptides and different things like that that do potentially interact. We're not going to go down the rabbit hole with that stuff because it's a big rabbit hole and it doesn't necessarily help our overall discussion here. But there are also some other drugs, and these are the ones that are probably more used, I would say, in fat loss, weight loss, obesity management, different things like that. But there are also drugs that aren't used as much in bodybuilding spheres, right? Well, some of them are. The GLP-1 agonists, which we'll talk about, they do seem to be taking or playing more and more of a role in stuff like bodybuilding. But it is interesting that the ones that we covered previously, they're the ones that bodybuilders are using. And then the ones that we're going to cover now in a second, these are the ones that more of the medical sphere are using, right? And that's kind of reflected in the risk profile or the side effect profile you'll see with the drugs. The ones that were discussed previously, there's oftentimes more side effects to using them than there are effects, or they aren't that effective for the specific goal that we have. Whereas these other drugs, they're a little bit more specific for fat loss, weight loss, whatever way you want to call it. And they also seem to have less of a side effect profile. Does that mean that there's no side effects? Absolutely not. But in terms of, you're talking about the general public, these seem to have less side effects. So Gary, what are these other diet drugs or weight loss, fat loss drugs, or whatever you want to call them? What are they?
Yeah, so firstly, there's a drug called Orlistat, and this has trade names such as Zenical or Ali. And this is an interesting drug because it's very simple. It's a very simple idea. Basically, what it does is it binds within the gut to lipases, which are the enzymes responsible for breaking down fat. And basically, it inhibits hydrolysis of triglycerides. So as a result of binding to the lipases, it stops them from working and stops the breakdown of fat occurring within the gut. So as a result, what you end up doing is not absorbing those fats, because we absorb free fatty acids, not triglycerides in their whole form. So those triglycerides or fats then end up being excreted. So you get about a 30% reduction in fat absorption, because basically you're just not taking it into your body. It's going into your gut and then you're pooping it out. And if you were to take this as a worked example, let's say you were, consuming 100 grams of fat per day, 9 calories per gram, 30 grams of that is not being absorbed, and then you get a reduction in your true caloric intake of about 270 calories. So you can see that's quite significant. That's clearly something that would contribute to fat loss. And this is just an interesting one in terms of the side effect profile, because I think it illustrates the difference in the way that medical doctors versus bodybuilders might think. Because in something like Orlistat, the most common side effect is something that you'd probably expect, okay? You're basically getting all this fat out through your rear end. So you end up with steatorrhea and potentially diarrhea. Maybe it's not the most comfortable going to the bathroom. That's something that would really bother a bodybuilder, but a bodybuilder would totally tolerate the fast heart rate, the risk of cardiovascular disease long term. Whereas the doctor is going to say, well, a bit of diarrhea or whatever, a bit of, fat in your stool, we'll tolerate that. That's fine. But long-term cardiovascular disease risk, okay, not so much. So it's just a difference in the way that you assess risk. So is this a very bad side effect? That's not so bad. There are other side effects. I'm not going to go through the side effects of all these medications because that's obviously something you discuss with your doctor. And it's going to vary by individual. But overall here, what we're doing is we're inhibiting the absorption of fat. As a result, we're excreting that fat, and we have technically then a reduction in our caloric intake.
Yeah, so again, it's pretty straightforward.
Very straightforward.
It reduces your energy intake. Again, if you want to lose fat or get weight loss, you're still going to have to manage that energy in, energy out, calories in, calories out, like overall equation. And this is just helping you do that by virtue of reducing the amount of fat that you absorb, and as a result, reducing the amount of calories that you are effectively consuming because you're just pooping them out, right? But again, it goes back to the same stuff that we talked about at the start. You do still need to have those healthy lifestyle habits in play. You still need to eat a good diet. You do still need to do exercise, etc. Now, obviously, if you have something that's helping you to the tune of dropping out 30% or so of your fat calories, like that obviously can be quite significant. Like, let's just say you're consuming 100 grams of fat, not unheard of, relatively whatever, right? Like that's quite a lot. That's like 30 grams, whatever, of fat that you're just not absorbing, right? Which is whatever, that's about 300 calories, is it? By basically 30 by effectively 10, like 300 calories. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of calories that you just didn't absorb. That could be significant fat loss over time, especially if you just kept the same habits or increased your health habits in terms of you did more exercise, you moved around more, etc. You could easily put yourself in a 500 calorie deficit by that drug and doing a little bit more exercise, and boom, fat loss happens fast then, Anyway, Gary, next drug, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so the next drug class is that of the GLP-1 agonists. So GLP is glucagon-like peptide 1. And then when we say agonist, it means that it basically has the same effect at that receptor as, GLP within the body. So we do have this within our body already, GLP-1, and it primarily seems to act on the gut and the brain stem, also some effects in the pancreas. But basically, we're looking at the gut and the brain, which are probably the two most common areas when it comes to these weight loss drugs in general. And the effect here is interesting because it goes back to what we were discussing previously, which is that there's a centrally mediated effect. So these drugs, including liraglutide, which you'll see referred to as Victoza or Saxenda, and semaglutide, which is Ozempic or Wegovy. Semaglutide is the most recent of interest. That's the one that got all that press there last year with the studies and the subsequent media exposure. So semaglutide is the one that's probably a little bit better. But basically what they both work by doing is attenuating hunger. So again, we're reducing our appetite, and we're also reducing brain activation after we eat. So if we have, a meal, there's a certain level of satisfaction and a certain level of residual desire for food that's going to vary between individuals. So we already know this from studies in people with obesity. They tend to be, a bit more sensitive to food cues, and they will be less likely to be full after a meal. So it's not just this, gluttony that this person has, that there's nothing that can be, or that's inherently down to their moral flaws, let's say. It's in fact a very real observable physiological difference in how that person responds to food and food cues to someone like myself, who's better able to regulate their body weight. So in this case, what we're doing is we're intervening with these medications to better enable that person to regulate their appetite and regulate their response to food. And as a result, then you see observed weight loss.
Yeah. And I think these drugs are probably going to become more and more popular over time because their side effect profile is, minimal.
Yeah.
I would.
It's just those kind of standard GI effects that pop up with all these, a bit of nausea, a bit of diarrhea, very tolerable in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. And I think, especially given the fact that it's basically what feels like a side effect, like you're just not as hungry. Like it doesn't feel like, I'm super stimulated, or this drug, I can feel it working. Like you just notice that you're just not as hungry. That's effectively how the drug is working, right? Like that's obviously very beneficial for just spontaneously, or at least it feels spontaneously reducing your calorie intake, right? So if you combine that with just having a little bit of an eye to your calorie intake itself, choosing better food choices, etc., and then also combining it with some exercise, like fat loss could happen very, very easily and have it feel very easy as well. So I can definitely see these drugs becoming more and more popular. Like obviously there's a lot of hype around them already. And obviously we have an obesity epidemic, which would be phenomenal if we solved. So stuff like this, I think it's only going to play a bigger and bigger role in this whole weight loss, fat loss realm. Do you have anything else to say on the GLP-1 agonist, Gary?
I don't think so, to be honest. I mean, it's a fairly simple in summary. Of course, there's more you can read about the mechanisms of action and everything. But I think like what you're seeing here that's really interesting is that, people are losing weight and then they're maintaining that weight loss, which is really the important thing that we don't often observe in weight loss trials. We very often see that after people lose weight, they regain it or they regain most of it. And it seems like these weight loss drugs have, overcome that to some extent and are enabling people then to lose far more weight. And it's also, anecdotally, I've seen some obesity doctors talk about how, they've had success, let's say, with someone that's lost loads of weight, and once they've lost all that weight, they've got this, insatiable hunger that they're really struggling to deal with, and that puts them then obviously at risk of weight regain. And in that population, in people who've already lost weight, there's been doctors who have used these GLP-1 agonists at that point in time, and that's enabled them then to maintain their weight loss because it's better regulated their appetite at that point in time. So, you can see that I'm sure there's going to be many interesting applications here, and I could probably see more bodybuilders, using these types of medications, potentially even in the post-competition period. Would be really interesting to see how people get on with these because of how severe the appetite can be at that point in time. And also maybe those who are even potentially on that kind of disordered eating spectrum, struggling with binge eating and things like that. It'd be interesting to see how these drugs might play a role. So yeah, I think we'll see a lot of interest in the coming years.
And in the bodybuilding sphere, I know a few of them are used, especially the shorter acting ones. I think liraglutide is shorter acting, if I'm not. Because bodybuilding is a bit of a strange one where you still need to eat, you still need to hit your calories, you still need to fuel muscle retention. Like you can't just have your appetite completely blunted. Like you're not going to get the physique that you want at the end of all of this. So you have to play around with a dosing schedule or like even a drug selection, whatever schedule, where you need to still eat, but having your hunger blunted a little bit could be really beneficial in something like, prepping for a bodybuilding stage. So again, it's interesting. It's interesting to see, first of all, just the drug category itself. I think this is a phenomenal area, that's being explored, but it's interesting then to see how that is being utilized in different spheres versus, like, say, the medical sphere, using it for obesity, that kind of stuff. And then bodybuilders going, you know what, this might actually help me stay on track with my diet when I'm doing a prep, But anyway, that's the GLP-1 agonists. I think they're really cool. But there's not much else that needs to be discussed with them. What's next, Gary?
The last one then is a drug called Misimba, with its trade name. I think that's the Irish one anyway. I'm not sure what it is in other countries. But this is a combination drug of naltrexone and bupropion. So this is interesting because it's probably not immediately intuitive why these drugs would be used. So naltrexone is an opioid receptor antagonist. So basically it's having the opposite effect of opioid drugs. So the way this works, the naltrexone component, is it has a reduction in the activation of reward systems. So, people take opioid-related drugs, things like heroin, for example, or OxyContin, etc. They get this massive they get this euphoric effect, this increase in reward. So this drug is effectively having the opposite effect. It's reducing the amount of reward that we're getting in response to, for example, food anticipation or craving, but also the reward after a meal. So you're basically it's a central effect within the brain that's making meals, or the thought of having meals, a little bit less rewarding. Okay, so that's an interesting effect. And then bupropion is kind of similar in that it's also acting centrally. This is a dopamine and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, and basically it has an appetite suppressive effect. So when you put those two together, you're getting a suppression of your appetite centrally, but you're also getting suppression of the reward that's anticipated from eating and the reward that comes from eating a meal. So again, overall effect here, reducing energy intake via those central mechanisms.
Yeah, 100%. And again, seems to be an effective drug for some people. And this is probably an important point to take away from this discussion. There are multiple mechanisms that may potentially help with fat loss, weight loss. Some of it is more centrally mediated in terms of like it's more we'll say a brain phenomenon, like your hunger signals. You're like, where do they come from? It's not like, it's not intuitive, we'll say, right? Some of them are just what we would classically think of if you come from more of a health and fitness realm, where you're like, oh, if I can increase my energy expenditure, I'm going to burn more calories just doing my normal life, right? Then there's other drugs that potentially affect your appetite, not in more of a central way, but more in a like anxiety produced way, in terms of they're like, right, you just feel more anxious, or because you're liberating more fat, for example, and you're using more fat for energy, maybe that evens out your appetite signaling, so you're not as hungry between meals. So there are a variety of different mechanisms, and that should give you hope. Well, if you're planning on using drugs, I suppose, that should give you hope in terms of there are different ways to overcome the specific issues that you have. Like there's no just one size fits all. There's no like, take this drug and it's going to work for everyone, or take this supplement or whatever. Like you can get help with the specific issues that you were having. If it's appetite regulation, for example, if it is, you're just feel like you don't move a lot, like there are stimulants, for example, that could be used. Now, again, we don't really recommend using any of these drugs. That's something that you should talk about with your doctor. It's not really our realm. Like we talk about health and fitness from the normal perspective, not the pharmacological perspective. But understanding these different drugs does actually help you understand what's at play in terms of just normal physiology and what levers to pull. If you're like, all right, I'm going to take a drug to increase my energy expenditure, and you're not doing some baseline habits like going for a 15-minute walk, like just trying to get your 10,000 steps per day, like you're kind of jumping the gun. You're kind of looking at the wrong area for help. Like you're not doing the baseline things that these drugs are just affecting those baseline things as and coming along with side effects while they do it, right? So if you're not maximizing your baseline habits already, it's kind of missing the forest for the trees. As we said at the start, for some people, the drugs are actually the missing piece, right? In terms of if you just take, say, a GLP-1 agonist, and all of a sudden you're much, much more easily able to stick to your diet, you now don't feel as hungry, like that could be a phenomenal addition to the overall fat loss, weight loss picture. You still do need to exercise, you still need to do all the stuff that comes along with that, you still need to find the time to do it, etc. You still do need to eat healthily, you still need to learn to cook food, learn how to shop, do all the stuff that goes along with it that we talk about. But certain drugs may help with that overall process, right? But we are still of a mind that, okay, there's certain things that we need to get dialed in at a baseline: good nutrition practices, good training practices, good sleep, good stress management, and every single thing is secondary to that. Obviously, again, like I said, for some people, for certain conditions, for certain populations, a drug might be the missing piece. Like if you have low testosterone, for example, and you're like, I just do not feel motivated, I do not feel like invigorated, I don't feel like I can do any of these things, and then we give you some testosterone, well, not us, but the medical sphere gives you some testosterone, and all of a sudden you're like, well, I'm really motivated, I actually don't have depression anymore, I feel like really gunning for it in terms of changing my body composition, improving my health, cooking good food, going to the gym, etc., etc. Like obviously that's the missing piece there for you, right? So it's important to understand that there are multiple vectors that we can look at, and it's important to understand that we have to get the baseline habits dialed in regardless. But then it is also important to recognize that drugs can help with that process, but drugs don't replace that process, those baseline habits, for most people at least.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I have to say on this topic. The only final thing would be there's I think there's a lot of confusion in the fitness industry about maybe the role of these drugs, these weight loss drugs. I think a lot of people have a knee-jerk response when they hear about people with obesity taking weight loss drugs, especially someone that maybe has lost a lot of weight themselves. They might feel like, oh, well, I had to do it this way. Why can't you do it this way? Or this is soft, or this is a cop out. It's, you're cheating the system. Why can't you just have more discipline, etc.? And I think there's just an element of humility that's required there in terms of understanding that you just don't know how someone else responds to food cues, how they respond to a given level of calories, etc., versus you. And we are all different in that sense. And that's, that's been observed. It's an evidence-based observation. It's not something that, we're just making up to justify people being lazy. It's not that simple. So while we absolutely are in favor of, yes, hard work, yes, discipline, put in the work, prepare your meals, get your nutrition, or absolutely in favor of all of that, but you can still hold that view and realize that these drugs have a very useful effect. And even if you're someone like, this is probably one of the points of contradiction that people have to resolve themselves. A lot of people that are anti-obesity, let's say, like they'll give out about the rise of obesity and they telling people to look after themselves, etc., are also against these drugs, which are going to solve it for these people and make them healthier. So if you care about someone's health, these medications have a role. So I understand the knee-jerk response. I understand where it comes from, but understanding that we do have those different responses and that we are different in the way that we deal with food can hopefully help you resolve some of those conflicts. So anything to add on that, or we're good?
Well, most people that give out about this stuff are also on testosterone and then also other illicit drugs. So, it's kind of hypocritical. But anyway, that's just an aside.
Drugs for me, but not for thee. So anyway, that's everything for this week, guys. One thing I wanted to add to our standard list of announcements is that we have started publishing the Triage Pillars or Foundation series on our website. So we want more people to get over to our website and read this, because it's it's something that we want to do more of, is written content, long form, detailed. You can sit down with, make notes, and actually understand these things properly. A lot of people benefit from the podcasts, but some people find that listening to podcasts, they do it when they're doing the dishes or they do it when they're driving. I do that a lot. And you mightn't have the time to really sit down and make notes and synthesize the information and make a plan of action as a result of that. So we want to have everything we're discussing in written form as well. So the one that we produced this week is the Foundations of Nutrition. And this is an incredibly long article. There's lovely graphics in there. There's solid theory and practice. And if you don't know where to start with setting up your diet, that gives you pretty much everything that you could need to be able to start getting healthier, start improving your performance, nutrition, even your fat loss, your body composition, etc. So check that out. We'll also have more of those coming in the coming weeks and months. So do stay tuned to our social media and we'll be keeping you updated. If you're not following us on social media, you can follow us at Triage Method and our individual accounts, which you'll find on that page. We also have a newsletter where we put out free content, so you can subscribe to that in the description box below. We do have coaching spaces available as well. So if you'd like to work with us in a training and nutrition capacity or nutrition only, you can put in your details in the description box below or check out some of our client testimonials. And then finally, we do also have a nutrition certification. So if you're interested in getting certified in nutrition, practicing as a nutritionist, and becoming a real professional when it comes to your ability to coach nutrition, that's something you can get involved with as well. We did just introduce a new payment plan for that, because the upfront lump sum is just not the best way for some people to make their payments. It's easier to manage your finances when you know what's coming out each month instead. So you can have a look at that and see if that suits you.
100%. I don't have anything else to add, except I hope everyone has a phenomenal week ahead.
Wonderful. See you in the next one, guys.